It started like too many nights for black men in America, flashing lights, demanding voices, and suspicion without reason. But just as the officers tightened their grip on control, they saw something inked into his skin, and everything changed. Not with words, not with threats, but with a symbol they couldn't ignore. What was it that stopped two officers cold and forced them to question everything they thought they knew about the man they targeted? Before we go into this powerful story, hit subscribe and tap the notification bell, because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're a wake-up call. And hey, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing our community from all over the world. The night was thick with tension as James sat behind the wheel of his car, the faint glow of the dashboard illuminating his calm but wary face. The red and blue lights spun behind him, a harsh reminder that this was no ordinary traffic stop. Two white officers approached, their steps purposeful, their eyes scanning James with a mixture of suspicion and authority. James's hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, fingers tense but steady, as if bracing for what was to come. The first officer, tall and broad-shouldered, leaned down to the window, his voice clipped and cold. "License and registration," he demanded, the command leaving no room for negotiation. James met his gaze without a flicker of fear, reaching slowly into his glove compartment to retrieve the documents. There was a smoothness in his movements, a practiced calm that belied the tight knot of discomfort in his chest. "You know why I stopped you?" the second officer asked, stepping back slightly but never taking his eyes off James. His tone was less direct, but no less accusatory. James shook his head subtly, the question hanging heavy in the night air. There was no immediate answer, no explanation that would satisfy the officer's unspoken assumptions. The officers exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them that James could sense but not hear. The first officer's eyes narrowed, his suspicion deepening as he scrutinized James's identification. "You're driving a little too slow back there. What's the deal?" he pressed, his voice sharpening with an edge that made James's skin crawl. James opened his mouth to respond, but thought better of it. Instead, he kept his expression neutral, his voice steady when he finally spoke. "I was driving the speed limit." The words were simple, unprovocative, but they did nothing to ease the officer's growing hostility. The tension thickened as the second officer moved closer, peering into the car through the passenger window. "Mind if we take a look inside?" he asked. Though it was clear, the question was rhetorical. James's eyes flicked to the officer, unblinking, and he shook his head firmly. "No, officer. I'm not comfortable with that." His refusal was calm, but resolute, a boundary drawn in the night. The officers' demeanors shifted almost imperceptibly, frustration seeping into their movements. The first officer's jaw clenched, his patience wearing thin. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice hard and unyielding. James hesitated only a moment before complying. His hands raised slightly as he opened the door and stepped onto the cold asphalt. The streetlights cast long shadows, the officers positioning themselves on either side of James like sentinels. The second officer's gaze roamed over James's frame, searching for something proof of guilt, perhaps, or a reason to justify their suspicion. But James stood tall, his posture unbroken, his breathing even. "You were speeding then?" The first officer questioned again, his tone accusatory. James shook his head once more. "No, I was not." His voice was clear, unwavering, but the officer seemed uninterested in his words. The encounter spiraled into a series of probing questions, each one more pointed than the last. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? Why didn't you pull over sooner when we signaled you?" James answered each calmly, his responses measured, refusing to give them any leverage. Yet, beneath the surface, a storm raged. James felt the weight of their gaze, the unspoken assumptions tied to the color of his skin and the way they perceived his presence. The officer's suspicion was not born of any concrete evidence, but from a preconceived narrative that painted James as a threat simply for being who he was. At one point, the first officer stepped forward abruptly, reaching for the door handle of James's car. "Open it," he commanded. James's heart pounded, but he held his ground. "I'm not consenting to a search without a warrant," he said firmly, the legal knowledge in his voice a shield against the escalating aggression. The moment hung suspended, the officers exchanging terse words as they debated their next move. The second officer's eyes flicked to his partner, then back to James, a silent calculation evident in his expression. The initial assumption of guilt began to falter, replaced by uncertainty. Still, the atmosphere remained charged, the imbalance of power unmistakable. James was the subject of their control, their suspicion, a heavy shroud that clung to him despite his innocence. The officers wielded their authority as a weapon, testing the limits of compliance and resistance. Throughout the ordeal, James maintained a composed exterior, his silence speaking volumes. He did not rise to the bait of provocation, nor did he retreat in fear. Instead, he embodied a quiet dignity, a refusal to be diminished by the unjust scrutiny he faced. The officer's questions grew more invasive, probing into personal details that had no bearing on the traffic stop. "What's your occupation? Who do you work for?" James answered without hesitation, his voice steady but carrying the weight of exhaustion. The interrogation felt less about the traffic violation and more about asserting dominance over a man they presumed guilty. As the minutes dragged on, the reality of the encounter settled in. James was caught in the crosshairs of a system that too often targeted men like him, reducing identity to suspicion and humanity to a checklist of threats. The officer's behavior was a stark reminder of the power imbalance ingrained in these interactions, where compliance was demanded but respect was withheld. When the first officer finally stepped back, signaling the end of the questioning, James's relief was tempered by the knowledge that this was not an isolated incident. The tension lingered, a silent testament to the everyday struggles faced by those subjected to racial profiling. James climbed back into his car with measured movements, the officers watching him closely until he merged back into traffic. The encounter left an indelible mark, a quiet but searing reminder of the precariousness of his place in a world quick to judge and slow to understand. The night swallowed him once more as he drove away, the red and blue lights fading into the distance, but the weight of the moment lingering. James' story was far from over, the confrontation only the opening chapter in a larger narrative about identity, authority, and the burden of being seen through the lens of suspicion. As the officers stepped back, their expressions shifting from suspicion to something less certain, James slowly rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. The dim streetlights caught the intricate ink etched across his forearms' bold Marine Corps tattoos that spoke of discipline, sacrifice, and a life shaped by structure and service. The sudden reveal was subtle, yet powerful, a silent statement that unsettled the rigid assumptions that had governed the encounter until that moment. The taller officer's eyes flickered involuntarily toward the tattoos, an unspoken recognition passing between the two men in uniform. James, sensing the shift, remained composed, his posture steady as he allowed the ink to speak volumes without uttering a word. The tattoos were more than mere decoration. They were emblems of his identity, of a chapter of his life that demanded respect, even from those who had initially approached him with doubt. The second officer's voice wavered slightly as he stepped forward, the hardness in his tone softening just enough to reveal a flicker of hesitation. "Marine Corps, huh?" he said, the words carrying a mix of curiosity and reluctant acknowledgement. James nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, Sergeant James Hayes, honorable discharge," he stated plainly, his military bearing evident in every syllable. The revelation changed the dynamic instantly. The officers, who had moments ago treated James like a suspect, now regarded him with a cautious respect that bordered on uncertainty. The air between them thickened with unspoken questions and recalibrated assumptions. This was not the narrative they had expected, nor one they were fully prepared to confront. James's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the officer's tentative stance. His service had instilled in him a discipline that transcended the immediate tension, a quiet confidence that came from knowing his worth and standing firm in the face of adversity. The tattoos on his arms were visible markers of that journey, a testament to the resilience and integrity that defined him. The first officer cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Well, Sergeant, I suppose that changes things a bit," he said, though the words felt hollow against the weight of James's presence. "But we still need to make sure everything's in order. You understand that, right?" James met his gaze evenly. "I understand the need for procedure, but I also expect to be treated with the respect that service members earn," he replied, his tone measured but firm. The officers exchanged glances again, the unspoken hierarchy in the interaction now complicated by James's military background. The narrative of authority was no longer one-sided. James's identity as a Marine disrupted the officers' assumptions, challenging the power dynamics at play. It was as if the tattoos themselves carried an unyielding authority, a reminder that respect was not granted lightly, but earned through dedication and sacrifice. The second officer stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We don't mean to be disrespectful, Sergeant. It's just protocol." There was an edge of apology beneath the formality, a recognition that their initial approach had been flawed. James nodded, acknowledging the admission without conceding the broader implications. The conversation shifted subtly, the officer's questions becoming less accusatory and more inquisitive. James answered each with the same calm precision, his military training evident in his measured responses. The tension that had gripped the encounter began to ease, replaced by a tentative understanding that was far from complete, but marked a significant departure from the earlier hostility. In this moment, James's military background became a bridge point of connection that transcended the racial and social barriers that had initially defined the encounter. His service was a testament to his character, an assertion of his place in a society that too often marginalized men like him. The officer's behavior reflected the internal conflict that many in law enforcement face when confronted with identities that challenge stereotypes. James was not just a black man pulled over for a minor traffic infraction. He was a veteran, a disciplined individual whose presence demanded a recalibration of their attitudes and assumptions. As the exchange continued, the narrative explored the tension between individual identity and institutional authority. James's military service was a powerful counterpoint to the officer's initial aggression, illustrating how personal history and dignity could disrupt entrenched patterns of bias. The first officer finally spoke with a hint of respect that had been absent before. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant. That's important to know." The words hung in the air, a tentative acknowledgement that carried weight beyond the immediate interaction. James inclined his head slightly, but did not let his guard down. "Thank you, and I expect that respect to extend to all encounters, not just this one," he replied, his voice steady. The officers nodded, the lesson implicit in his statement clear and unmissable. The scene underscored the complexity of encounters shaped by race, authority, and identity. James's tattoos were more than ink. They were symbols of a life lived with honor and discipline, challenging the officers to reconsider their assumptions and biases. His composed presence disrupted a narrative that too often painted black men as threats, replacing it with one of respect and humanity. As the officers prepared to conclude the stop, the lingering tension remained, a reminder that while individual moments of recognition could shift attitudes, the broader systemic issues were far from resolved. James's military background had granted him a measure of protection and respect, but the encounter was a stark illustration of the precariousness faced by many in similar situations. The story highlighted how identity and service could serve as shields against unjust suspicion, but also how reliance on such markers exposed the uneven terrain of justice and equality. James's experience was a reflection of the ongoing struggle to navigate authority and prejudice, to earn respect in a system that often assumed guilt before innocence. Throughout the interaction, James maintained a quiet strength, embodying the resilience that his tattoos represented. His military service was not just a past chapter, but a living testament to his character, an unspoken challenge to the officers to rise above their biases. The officers, in turn, were forced to confront their own preconceptions, the encounter serving as a moment of reckoning that disrupted their initial assumptions. The narrative delved into the psychological impact of such moments, revealing how identity could shift power dynamics and force a re-evaluation of authority. As James gathered his documents and prepared to leave, the atmosphere had transformed. The officer's suspicion had given way to a grudging respect, a recognition that beneath the surface of a routine traffic stop lay deeper truths about identity, service, and dignity. The night air was heavy with unspoken acknowledgement, the encounter a microcosm of the broader societal tensions that shaped interactions between law enforcement and marginalized communities. James' military tattoos were a beacon of discipline and honor, a silent but potent reminder that respect must be earned and given in equal measure. The story lingered on this moment, capturing the subtle but significant shift that James's identity had catalyzed. It was a narrative about the power of personal history to challenge systemic bias, about the resilience required to stand firm in the face of suspicion, and about the potential for individual dignity to reshape moments of conflict into opportunities for understanding. As the officers stepped back, allowing James to move on, the encounter closed not with resolution, but with the promise of continued vigilance, a reminder that the struggle for respect and justice was ongoing, shaped by the courage of those who refused to be defined by prejudice. The moment the officers caught sight of James's Marine Corps tattoos, a subtle but palpable shift rippled through the tension that had gripped the traffic stop. The first officer's hand hesitated near his radio. The rigid confidence that had dominated moments before now, fractured by uncertainty. His eyes locked on the inked insignia symbols of service, sacrifice, and a regimented life that demanded respect, and for the first time, his authority wavered. James stood still, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The harsh edge in the officers' voices softened, replaced by a quiet hesitation that unsettled the earlier dynamic. The second officer, who had been the more aggressive of the two, now glanced to his partner as if searching for guidance, unsure how to proceed. The power that had seemed absolute a moment ago was now complicated by the weight of James's identity. "You're a Marine veteran," the first officer finally said, his voice betraying a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. It was a statement, not a question, and it hung between them like an unspoken truce. James nodded, his posture steady, the discipline of his service grounding him, even as the officers re-evaluated their stance. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. James took a breath, his expression calm but resolute. "I'm here to assert my rights," he said, quietly but firmly. "I expect to be treated fairly and with respect." His words were measured, carrying the authority of a man who had faced far greater challenges and emerged unbroken. The officers exchanged glances again, the initial arrogance giving way to cautious consideration. It was clear they had underestimated James from the start, their assumptions built on prejudice rather than fact. Now, confronted with the reality of his service and demeanor, they hesitated, caught between the desire to uphold their authority and the necessity of acknowledging his dignity. The first officer shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Look, Sergeant, we just want to make sure everything is above board," he said, the edge in his voice dulled but still present. "You understand the situation, right?" His gaze flickered to James's face, searching for any sign of defiance or weakness. James met his eyes unflinchingly. "I understand," he replied. "But suspicion alone is not a justification for harassment." His words cut through the lingering tension, a reminder that authority must be exercised with accountability. The officer's initial behavior had crossed that line, and James was not willing to let it stand unchallenged. The narrative expanded beyond the immediate encounter, exposing the systemic issues that allowed such confrontations to unfold. The officer's readiness to assume guilt based on skin color was emblematic of a broader pattern of racial profiling and misconduct within law enforcement. James's military tattoos, once revealed, disrupted the script but did not erase the underlying problem. The second officer shifted his weight, glancing toward his partner before speaking. "We can't just let you go without checking some things," he said, the words laced with hesitation. James's eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the familiar dance of authority testing boundaries. "I will cooperate within the limits of the law," he responded. "But I will not submit to unlawful searches or intimidation." The officers fell silent again, the realization dawning that James's composed assertion of his rights was a formidable barrier to their unchecked power. The psychological battle played out in subtle shifts of posture and guarded expressions. James embodied resilience, using his military training to navigate the fraught interaction with dignity and clarity. Behind the scenes, the encounter sparked internal questions about the conduct of the officers involved. Their initial rush to judgment now faced scrutiny, both from James's steadfastness and the visible marks of his service. The potential for accountability loomed, a challenge to the systemic culture that had enabled such behavior. James, aware of the stakes, chose his words carefully. "I will be filing a formal complaint regarding this stop," he stated plainly, the decision both a personal stand and a call for institutional reflection. The officers stiffened, the mention of complaint triggering defensive responses. Yet, James's calm resolve left no room for dismissal. The narrative broadened to critique not just individual prejudice, but the mechanisms that allowed abuse of power to flourish. James's experience was a microcosm of the struggles faced by many who encountered law enforcement with distrust bred from history and repeated injustice. His complaint was more than a personal grievance. It was a beacon demanding change. As the officers processed this, their demeanor shifted from confrontation to calculation. The first officer's eyes flicked to his radio, fingers twitching as if contemplating a call. The second officer glanced at James, weighing the consequences of their next actions. The power dynamic had inverted, with James now holding the moral high ground. The tension remained thick, but the officer's aggression had been replaced by caution. James's military background and unwavering assertion of his rights had dismantled their attempts at intimidation. The stop, intended as a routine assertion of authority, had become a moment of reckoning. Throughout the exchange, James's composed presence contrasted sharply with the officer's faltering confidence. His tattoos were not just symbols of past service, but instruments of present empowerment, challenging the very foundation of their assumptions. The psychological interplay revealed the fragility of authority when confronted with truth and dignity. The officer's internal conflict mirrored broader institutional struggles between maintaining order and confronting ingrained bias. James's complaint promised to ignite a process of internal review, an opportunity to examine and reform policies that permitted such encounters. The narrative underscored the potential for individual courage to catalyze systemic change. As the stop drew to a close, the officers reluctantly prepared to end the encounter. Their actions now tempered by James's steadfastness and the visible reminders of his service. The first officer sighed, a gesture of reluctant acceptance, while the second officer maintained a guarded silence. James gathered his belongings, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The night air was heavy with unresolved tension, the echoes of confrontation lingering even as the immediate conflict subsided. His complaint marked the beginning of a larger battle, one that extended beyond the traffic stop to the heart of institutional accountability. The narrative captured this moment of transition, the shift from individual harassment to collective responsibility. James's experience highlighted the power of identity and courage to disrupt patterns of injustice, forcing a reckoning within systems resistant to change. Behind the scenes, the impending investigation loomed, promising disciplinary measures and policy reviews. James's complaint was not merely an act of defiance, but a catalyst for a broader conversation about racial profiling, respect, and the role of law enforcement in a just society. The psychological weight of the encounter lingered, a reminder of the stakes involved whenever power is wielded without empathy or fairness. James's resilience illuminated the path forward, demonstrating how dignity and truth could expose the flaws beneath the veneer of authority. As James prepared to leave, the officers' gazes followed him with a mixture of respect and unease. The moment was a quiet victory, a testament to the impact one individual could have when standing firm against systemic injustice. The story paused here. The unresolved tension, a reflection of ongoing struggles. James's steadfastness had disrupted the cycle of suspicion and harassment, but the journey toward accountability and reform was just beginning. The encounter served as a powerful reminder that true justice requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Following the submission of James's formal complaint, the police department found itself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight. An internal investigation was launched with a brisk efficiency that belied the simmering tensions beneath the surface. The officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome, a procedural step that sent ripples through the precinct, igniting conversations that had long been whispered in hallways and break rooms. Within the department, the atmosphere was charged. Some officers expressed frustration, perceiving the investigation as a challenge to their authority and professionalism. Others, more reflective, recognized the need to confront the systemic issues that James's case illuminated. The division underscored a deeper struggle within law enforcement, a battle between preserving tradition and embracing necessary reform. The investigators meticulously reviewed body camera footage, radio transmissions, and statements from all parties involved. The initial aggressive behavior displayed by the officers came under close scrutiny, revealing a pattern of racial profiling and misuse of power that extended beyond the single incident. The evidence painted a stark picture of how implicit biases could escalate routine encounters into harrowing experiences for those targeted. James's complaint became a catalyst, not only prompting disciplinary measures against the officers, but also sparking a broader dialogue about racial sensitivity and community relations. The department's leadership convened a series of meetings aimed at addressing the cultural and procedural shortcomings laid bare by the incident. Training programs were re-evaluated, with an emphasis on de-escalation techniques and implicit bias education. Community leaders and activists seized upon the case as a rallying point. Public forums were organized, drawing attention to the pervasive issue of racial profiling and the need for transparency and accountability. James' story resonated deeply, his composed response and military background lending a powerful narrative to the calls for change. Within the precinct, officers participated in workshops designed to foster empathy and cultural competence. The sessions were met with mixed reactions. Some embraced the opportunity for growth, while others remained skeptical, resistant to confronting ingrained prejudices. The tension between progress and inertia was palpable, reflecting the broader societal challenges faced in addressing systemic racism. James, meanwhile, watched from a distance as his personal ordeal transformed into a movement for institutional change. His decision to stand firm had ignited a chain reaction, compelling the department to reckon with uncomfortable truths. Though he remained cautious, wary of promises unfulfilled, he recognized the potential for meaningful reform, spurred by his courage. The disciplinary process against the officers unfolded methodically. Internal Affairs presented their findings to the police board, recommending sanctions ranging from mandatory retraining to suspension, and, in severe cases, termination. The recommendations sparked debate within the department, balancing considerations of justice, morale, and public trust. The officers involved were given the opportunity to respond, their defenses revealing a mix of regret, defensiveness, and justification. The proceedings illuminated the complexities of accountability within law enforcement, where personal biases intersect with institutional culture. The outcome sought to send a clear message that misconduct would not be tolerated. As the department implemented new policies, a gradual shift in institutional attitudes began to emerge. Officers reported increased awareness of the impact of their actions and the importance of respecting all citizens equally. While change was neither swift nor universal, the momentum generated by James's complaint created a tangible impetus for progress. The narrative also explored the nuanced relationship between military service and law enforcement culture. James's experience highlighted the respect accorded to veterans, yet also revealed the limitations of such respect when confronted with deep-seated racial biases. The department's efforts to integrate lessons from his case into training underscored a recognition of the value of discipline and integrity embodied by servicemen and women. Community outreach programs expanded, fostering dialogue between police and residents aimed at rebuilding trust. James participated in some of these initiatives, his voice lending authenticity and gravity to discussions about fairness and justice. His presence bridged gaps, illustrating how individual experiences could inform broader efforts toward reconciliation. The story underscored the importance of systemic change, how individual acts of courage, like James's, could illuminate flaws and inspire reforms that ripple through institutions. It portrayed the delicate balance of addressing misconduct without alienating those within the force committed to positive change. Throughout, James remained a figure of quiet strength. His military background and composed demeanor served as both shield and beacon, guiding him through the turbulence of institutional scrutiny and public attention. His journey was emblematic of the broader struggle for equity and accountability within law enforcement. The department's gradual adoption of new protocols reflected a commitment to reducing harassment and promoting respect for all individuals. These changes were not merely procedural, but represented an evolving ethos, a recognition that the legitimacy of policing depended on fairness and mutual respect. As the investigation wound down and policies shifted, the precinct began to glimpse a future where encounters like James's would be less fraught, where suspicion would not be the default, and dignity would be the baseline. The narrative captured this tentative evolution, acknowledging the long road ahead while celebrating the breakthroughs achieved. Within the community, James's case became a symbol of resilience and the power of standing firm. His actions inspired others to confront injustice, fostering a culture of accountability and hope. The story emphasized that systemic change is often incremental, but driven by individuals who refuse to accept the status quo. The precinct's internal dynamics continued to evolve, with ongoing debates and training sessions reinforcing the lessons learned. Officers shared their experiences and challenges, contributing to a collective effort to transform policing practices. The narrative highlighted the complexity of such change, involving mindset shifts as much as policy adjustments. James's involvement in public discussions and police community forums added a personal dimension to the reforms. His story humanized the abstract issues of bias and misconduct, making them tangible and urgent. Through his voice, the community engaged more deeply with the realities of policing and the necessity of mutual respect. The story conveyed the interplay between individual courage and institutional responsibility. James's complaint was both a personal stand and a catalyst for broader change, illustrating how accountability and reform are intertwined. The narrative portrayed the gradual dismantling of systemic barriers as a collective endeavor, fueled by voices like his. As the precinct adopted new approaches, the officers involved faced consequences commensurate with their actions. The disciplinary measures served as a warning and a precedent, signaling a shift toward greater transparency and justice. The process was neither easy nor universally accepted, but it marked progress. Throughout the unfolding events, James remained grounded, his military discipline and quiet resolve guiding him. He navigated the complexities of public scrutiny and institutional change with dignity, embodying the resilience that had defined his service and now defined his role as an agent of reform. The story captured the multifaceted nature of transformation, how individual experiences intersect with systemic structures, and how courage can illuminate paths toward justice. It portrayed James's journey not as an isolated incident, but as part of a larger movement toward equity and respect within law enforcement and society at large. The police department's corridors buzzed with a restrained energy, the undercurrent of change palpable yet carefully measured. The disciplinary actions taken against the officers involved in James's traffic stop sent a clear message. The department would no longer tolerate abuse of power or racial profiling. The officers faced suspensions, retraining, and in one case, terminaciona, tangible reckoning that echoed through the precinct and beyond. James stood quietly amidst the unfolding transformations, his presence a symbol of resilience. The Marine Corps tattoos on his arms, once a silent assertion of identity, had become emblems of justice in the eyes of the community. His composed confrontation had disrupted a system too often silent in the face of misconduct, inspiring others to demand accountability and respect. The narrative traced James's evolution from a man caught in a fraught encounter to a figure embodying dignity and strength. His military service, far from a mere background detail, was portrayed as a powerful tool that commanded respect and challenged prejudice. Through his calm and unwavering demeanor, James demonstrated how personal identity could subvert assumptions and reshape interactions with authority. Community response to the department's reforms was cautiously optimistic. Forums and meetings where James shared his experience became platforms for dialogue, healing, and education. His story resonated, illuminating the complexities of policing and the human impact of systemic biases. He became a bridge between law enforcement and the residents they served, fostering understanding amid lingering mistrust. Within the precinct, the atmosphere slowly shifted. Officers increasingly embraced the new protocols and training initiatives aimed at reducing harassment and promoting equitable treatment. While resistance lingered among some, the overall trajectory pointed toward a culture more attuned to justice and respect. James's case was frequently cited as a turning point, a moment when accountability moved from abstract ideal to actionable reality. The narrative underscored the power of individual courage to spark institutional change. James's decision to file a complaint and stand firm in his rights forced an examination of practices that had long been overlooked or ignored. His story became a testament to the impact one person could have when refusing to be silenced or diminished. His Marine Corps service was not only a source of personal pride, but a beacon that inspired others facing similar challenges. By embodying resilience and dignity, James shattered stereotypes and provided a roadmap for confronting injustice with strength and integrity. The tattoos that marked his service were thus transformed into symbols of empowerment and hope. The story highlighted how James's journey transcended his personal experience, touching on broader societal issues of race, authority, and justice. His confrontation with the officers was a microcosm of systemic struggles, and his response offered a counter-narrative to the often dehumanizing encounters faced by marginalized communities. As reforms took root, the precinct saw tangible improvements in community relations. Trust, though still fragile, began to mend through sustained efforts and open communication. James's participation in outreach programs and educational forums lent authenticity and urgency to these initiatives, reinforcing the importance of lived experience in shaping policy. The narrative portrayed James as a catalyst for change's presence and voice instrumental in transforming a painful encounter into a platform for progress. His story emphasized that systemic change requires not only policy shifts, but also the courage of individuals to confront injustice and demand accountability. The officers held accountable served as a reminder that no one was above scrutiny, and that the legitimacy of law enforcement depended on fairness and respect. The disciplinary actions reverberated as both consequence and caution, encouraging others within the force to examine their own conduct and biases. James's journey was also a reflection on the intersection of military service and civilian life. His experience revealed how the discipline and honor ingrained through his Marine Corps background equipped him to navigate and challenge systemic inequities. This connection added depth to his role as an agent of change, bridging worlds often seen as disparate. Throughout, James remained grounded, his quiet strength unshaken by public attention or institutional pressures. His composed demeanor and unwavering commitment to justice stood in contrast to the tumultuous backdrop of the encounter and its aftermath. The narrative captured this resilience as both personal and emblematic of a larger fight for dignity. The story closed on a note of cautious hope, acknowledging that while progress had been made, the journey toward full equity and respect was ongoing. James's experience served as a powerful reminder that confronting injustice takes courage and that individual actions can ripple outward to inspire systemic reform. His Marine Corps tattoos, once hidden beneath sleeves, now bore witness to a journey of resistance and change, a testament to the power of identity and the enduring struggle for justice. Through James, the narrative celebrated the impact one person can have when standing firm against oppression, embodying the hope that meaningful reform is possible. In the quiet aftermath of the confrontation and the ensuing reforms, James' story continued to resonate. It became a touchstone for community advocates, law enforcement leaders, and everyday citizens alike, a symbol of the ongoing quest for accountability, dignity, and respect in the face of systemic challenges. The precinct, transformed but still imperfect, carried the legacy of James' stand. His journey illuminated the path forward, reminding all that justice is not a destination, but a continuous process shaped by the courage to speak truth and demand change. Through his actions, James redefined what it meant to confront authority, not with anger or fear, but with calm strength and unwavering principles. His story invited reflection on the power of individual agency within larger institutions and the vital role of personal integrity in fostering justice. As the community and the police department moved forward, James's experience remained a beacon, an enduring narrative of resilience, accountability, and hope that challenged systemic injustice and inspired meaningful change. If this story moved you, don't scroll past like, share, and subscribe to stand for truth and justice. Drop your comments if you believe respect should never depend on appearances. We tell the stories others ignore, help us keep them alive. Thanks for watching.